You know what they say about the road to hell, right? Welcome to the Rob Lett Show. I'm your host, Rob Lett. We call these segments Soapbox News. They're current events I felt compelled to get on my soapbox about. It's also your chance to get on your soapbox in our comments section. The Second Amendment is under attack. That's the focus of today's Soapbox News. Not a lot to unpack here today. In this episode, we're going to discuss the road to hell, our past gun culture, why we have a Second Amendment in the first place, the response from the left, and dangerous times. We're less than 200 subscribers away from having 1,000 subscribers. So before you get started, I'd like you to go ahead and do a few things. First of all, like this video, subscribe to it. If you're on YouTube, to the upper right-hand corner, you're gonna see a bell. That's a notifications bell. Click it, and it'll notify you the next time we release a new show. If you're on Rumble, though, to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a share button. Click it, and it'll share this video with a friend of yours who should have been here with us today. Go ahead and do all of those things that apply right now. Economist Milton Friedman once said, "One of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results." You've probably heard the more popular version of that quote that says the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's a popular way of saying someone's attempting to do something that sounds nice on the surface, but will end in disaster because they haven't thought through the implications of their actions. The latest attacks on our Second Amendment are perfect examples of this in real time. Unless you've been under a rock, you've surely heard that we've had several mass shootings in recent days. It's an unfortunate occurrence we can all agree happens far too often. Both the left and right agree on this. What we don't agree on is an appropriate solution. I know this isn't the same thing, but I want to remind you what Kamala Harris did when we had a border crisis at the beginning of this year.
Vice President Harris in Mexico, meeting with the Mexican president.
You can't say you care about the border without caring about the root causes.
Part of her first foreign trip, targeting the root causes of the record migrant surge.
That's right. When Trump was president, they had all the answers. All the problems of the world fell at the feet of the president. AOC did her fake photo op to protest the horrible conditions of immigrants when Trump was president. But now that a Democrat was president, suddenly these crises were no longer the responsibility of the administration. Suddenly they want to travel all the way to Guatemala so that they can sit down and discuss the root causes of why immigrants want to come here in the first place. Kamala took a trip to Guatemala to flat out tell the people to their face, don't come here.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come.
What's my point, you may ask? My point is, a crime was being committed. Illegal immigration. There were criminals involved. The illegal border crossers. And the view of the administration was, back then, is you can't blame all of us for the actions of a few criminals. They broke the law, not us. So let's sit down with these folks and figure out what makes them do what they do. But when it comes to guns, they contradict themselves. Now they're clearly willing to indict all Americans for the actions of a few criminals. They suddenly have no interest in wanting to know the root causes of why a person would want to kill others and then kill themselves. They're inconsistent. They change their view based on whether or not they can weaken the Republican base. This anti-gun hysteria is not based on any facts at all. It's fear-mongering, designed to rob Americans of the right to defend themselves. Now, even though I can't see you, I know some of you nearly passed out when I said that anti-gun hysteria wasn't based on any facts. How can you say that, Rob? I guarantee you some of you are ready to quote some statistics to me. Some of you are ready to send me a video link and put it in my comments section. Some of you are ready to recommend some books that I can read. And here's what I'm going to tell you. Save your breath. And that's the problem with Americans today. Everyone's got some propaganda that they want you to read, to watch. They got some data from a statistician that's so polished, it'll make you forget your common sense. Sadly, I'm even starting to see Republicans cave on this issue. See, the data I'm about to drop on you, you don't have to Google. I don't have a link to send you, no article for you to read. It's just called life. It's called what you've observed after being on this earth for 53 years. Are you ready for my data? You don't have to take notes. Put your pen away. You can ask your mama and daddy what I'm about to tell you, or maybe your grandma and grandpa. But they'll tell you that I'm right. The left's whole argument is that America has too many guns. It's this gun culture of America that has led to these mass shootings, they say. This flawed logic is the justification for taking all of Americans' guns. And it's bull, I say. Correlation does not equal causation. So without further ado, here's my data. When I was a kid, we had a serious gun culture. But we didn't call it gun culture back then. We just called it being a boy, which is also under attack. But that's another subject. When I was a boy, I owned a lot of guns. Not the real ones, mind you. Toy guns. I had cap guns. I had the kind of guns that shot paper caps. I had the kind of guns that shot plastic caps. But I'm not done. Today, Chris Rock jokes about G.I. Jane. But long before there was a G.I. Jane, young boys in the 70s used to play with an action figure called G.I. Joe. And I got news for you. G.I. Joe came with a gun, came with a knife, and a few hand grenades just for good measure. But I'm not done. I own several colorful water guns. You know, the kind you can see through and anyone can tell they were obvious water guns. But I also owned water guns that you might have to do a double take, like the pump action shotgun I had that time, or the time that I owned a Uzi. That's right, none of this semi-automatic stuff. I owned a fully automatic water gun. But I'm not done. We played cops and robbers. The cop set came with a gun, a badge, a handcuff, and a set of keys. We played cowboys and Indians, which also means we had bows and arrows. But we didn't just buy guns. Hell, we made our own guns called zip guns out of wood, rubber bands, and clothespins. We also made slingshots. There were a million ways for a young boy to put their eye out back in the 70s. With all those guns and projectiles, you can be sure we had shootouts with each other. We would take cover behind stuff, even though most of the time our guns weren't actually shooting anything. We just had active imaginations. Some of you may be listening to this and saying, wow, that sure was a lot of gun culture. Are you sure that wasn't just your neighborhood? Nope, wasn't just my neighborhood. That was America in the 1970s. Even our cartoons were the kind of cartoons the media wouldn't dare let your kids watch today.
Let's run through that again. Okay. Would you like to shoot me now or wait till you get home? Shoot him now. Shoot him now. You keep on to this. He doesn't have to shoot you now. Ha! That's it. Hold it right there. Pronoun trouble. It's not he doesn't have to shoot you now. It's he doesn't have to shoot me now. Well, I say he does have to shoot me now. So shoot me now.
Now I'm done. Did you notice you didn't have to Google any statistics for anything I just said? Everything I just said, 100% fact. Oh, but you're probably wondering why I told you all of that in the first place. I told you all that just to ask you one simple question. How many mass shootings do you think we had back then? Care to guess? If you guessed 0, congratulations.
Come on down!
That's right. 0, nada, zilch, nothing. Do you know how many mass shootings my friends had even though we went to different schools? Yep. 0. Some of you youngsters watching this today may have a hard time comprehending this. How in the world were you surrounded by guns and everybody didn't kill each other? How in the world were guns part of your everyday life and yet you didn't use them to resolve your conflicts? Weird, huh? It's almost like we knew the difference between fantasy and reality. Not like these people who think there are 72 genders. But nope. Everybody wasn't killing each other. Everybody wasn't pulling out guns over nonsense. Do you know what everybody was doing back in the 1970s?
Everybody was kung fu fighting.
Yep, that was a popular song in the 70s. Kind of lets you know where everybody's head was at. Even though we played with guns all the time, we never actually used a gun to resolve a conflict. Everyone was enrolled in some kind of kung fu class, a karate class, a boxing class, a wrestling class. A lot of guys started lifting weights so that they could become stronger. Sure, we fought, but we lived to laugh about it the next day, and we were friends again. The way we dealt with bullies back then is you learned how to stand up for yourself, and that was usually the end of it. Do you see why it's important to use your own brain? The Democrat Party says more guns equals more mass shootings. And yet, I just rattled off more than a decade of kids playing with almost nothing but guns, and yet, among us, not a single instance of a mass shooting. Explain that. Nobody wants to. Even before my time, I've seen photos of when kids used to actually bring their firearms to school. Yep, the same way some schools today have chess clubs, they used to have gun clubs with the same results. No mass shootings. This column, written by Molly Peterson for the Oregonian in 2019, talks about the days when the guns in Portland schools were a good thing. I want to be clear. I didn't say I'm advocating that today. I'm only asking you to re-examine what the left is telling you when they tell you that more guns equal more violence. They don't. Someone's being dishonest. But maybe you were born during or after the 80s, so you can't relate to anything I just said because that was all before your time. Can I give you another truth to ponder then? one that you can verify without Google? You may already know that I've been a real estate investor and an international speaker. Professionally, I've been among some of the top income earners in the United States. For most of my career, I've been the only black speaker on the circuit. Most of my friends and colleagues have predominantly been white. Can I tell you something politicians are afraid to say? I've noticed many of my white friends are into guns. And when I say into guns, I mean into guns. They don't just know about the popular guns like the 9mm or the AR-15 or the AK-47. They know about the guns that most people have never heard of. I've got friends of mine who, if nobody stops them, they can literally talk for hours and hours about guns. I've had friends who, for Christmas, all they want is ammo. And that wasn't even a joke. So understand, if I asked some of my white friends to send me a picture of some of the guns they owned, based on their description, some of their collections might look like this. Now, they didn't necessarily buy all those guns themselves. Some of those guns have been passed down from generation to generation. Others may have been given to them as gifts. But the point that I'm really getting at is, according to the left, given the volume of guns that they own among white people or in rural areas where people who own guns tend to live, you'd expect the murder rate to be the highest. But actually, that's not true. The murder rates in most rural areas are comparably low. By contrast, I can't name a black friend of mine who talks for hours and hours about guns. I'm not saying people like that don't exist. I'm just saying I can't name one. Now, I know some black friends who own a few guns, but honestly, prior to 2020, most of the black friends that I know, in particular the Democrat ones, they didn't own a firearm at all. But even the ones who owned a few guns, none of them can hold a candle to the number of guns my white friends own, and yet, the murder rate in the areas where some of my black friends live were ridiculously high. You can see why politicians don't want to touch this. Now, before you get emotional, I'm not making this an argument about race. This is why we can never get to the truth of things, because people get sidetracked and the Democrat Party uses this to their advantage. This is not about race. If you took the people out of the equation and everyone suddenly beamed up, just like in Star Trek, the only thing left in both the city and the rural areas would be the guns themselves. You follow me? The left argues that wherever you find more guns, you'll find more violence. And I'm showing you that is not true. Typically, in rural areas, you will find there are higher numbers of guns, but lower murder rates. In the cities, you will find that there are lower numbers of guns, yet higher murder rates. So the left's justification for taking your guns purely based on the number of guns in the US is pure BS. It's only when you add the people back into the equation that you suddenly realize maybe it makes sense to have one of those root causes conversations, because the problem is not the guns themselves. I'll admit, when I was putting all this stuff together to show it to you, it hadn't really dawned on me just how much guns have played a role in our society until I started reviewing my own childhood. So I can certainly understand why a person might say, why in the world do we have a Second Amendment in the first place? So let me explain why without sounding too much like a history nerd. First of all, I will say that I'm amazed at the number of people who are willing to have a conversation about the Second Amendment without ever having read it thoroughly. So the first step in understanding why we have a Second Amendment is to actually read it. The Second Amendment: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. If you read it carefully, this clause is addressing two groups, both the militia and the people. Now, you don't have to be an attorney to realize that the easiest part of this clause to understand is the part that says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Shall not be infringed. They made that part so crystal clear, you should immediately realize the founders wanted this right to be secure. Just like the Second Amendment, too many people talk about the Constitution without having actually read it. Because if they had actually read the Constitution, they would have noticed a pattern. The phrase, the right of the people, is used quite a bit. Every time the right of the people is used, it's in reference to protecting the people from their government. Your First Amendment right, that we know as free speech, gives you the right to peaceably assemble and disagree with your government. People versus government. Our founders wanted to make sure this wasn't like other countries where you could say something against your government today and then be executed because of what you said. The Constitution made it known that it was the people who were to run the show, not the government. And in case you didn't catch that, your Fourth Amendment right secures your right against unreasonable searches and seizures. From whom? The government. There it is again, you versus the government. Anytime you hear the right of the people, you can be sure it's talking about against the government. All of this was written to protect you, so why would the Second Amendment be any different? So someone explain to me why then, according to the left, that the Constitution would go from you being able to say whatever you wanted, from you being able to keep the government out of your house and home from unreasonable search and seizures, to suddenly, in the Second Amendment, allowing the government to just come in the house and then seize your property. It's because it doesn't. That's why. The Militia Act of 1792 defined the militia as white males between the ages of 18 through 45. These were American citizens. Obviously, through amendments, these citizens also included people of all races and of all genders. But why? Well, the amendment actually tells you why in the amendment itself. Because it's necessary for the security of a free state. Free from what, you ask? Tyranny, both foreign and domestic. So the reason why we have the Second Amendment is to protect you from the same kind of tyranny that we witness other immigrants running from when they come here. Again, protecting you from your government. What Democrat supporters never seem to understand is that if the Constitution was intended to provide protections to you against the government, and then you support the party of big government, you just voted against yourself. You literally just voted to strip yourself of all of the rights that God gave you, but the Constitution secured. I have a friend of mine who used to argue me down about the right to bear arms. He said we didn't need it. That's what the police are for. And if you feel that strongly about it, buy yourself a shotgun to protect yourself at home. All of the talking points that I know he stole from Joe Biden, because I heard Joe Biden say that stuff verbatim. But suddenly during 2020, my friend bought a firearm. He bought a 9mm to be exact. He didn't even buy the shotgun Joe Biden told him to get. What's his excuse for buying it? He blames Trump for making him feel unsafe, of course. Now, I know all his rhetoric isn't true, but the part that's so sad to me is that he's too blind to see that the very president that he voted for is now in the process of taking the very gun that he bought to protect his own family. Just open your eyes and watch how leftists move internationally, whether they're in the United States or outside of the United States. Did you see Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's announcement this past week in Canada?
We're introducing legislation to implement a national freeze on handgun ownership. What this means is that it will no longer be possible to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns anywhere in Canada. In other words, we're capping the market for handguns. As a further part of this new legislation, we're also fighting gun smuggling and trafficking by increasing maximum criminal penalties and providing more tools for law enforcement to investigate firearm crimes. And we'll require the permanent alteration of long gun magazines so they can never hold more than 5 rounds. These are actions that doctors, experts, and chiefs of police have been calling for years. And we're acting on their advice.
These guys all talk to each other and they're all planning the same thing.
But here's what I believe we have to do. Here's what the overwhelming majority of American people believe we must do. Here's what the families in Buffalo and Uvalde in Texas told us we must do. We need to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And if we can't ban assault weapons, then we should raise the age to purchase them from 18 to 21. Strengthen background checks. Enact safe storage law and red flag laws. Repeal the immunity that protects gun manufacturers from liability. We should limit how many rounds a weapon can hold. Why in God's name should an ordinary citizen be able to purchase an assault weapon that holds 30-round magazines that let mass shooters fire hundreds of bullets in a matter of minutes?
No matter where you find leftists on the planet, they're all drooling over the idea of taking your guns, limiting your guns, encouraging the people to tell the government that you own a gun. So when the left bans your guns and defunds the police, you can't protect yourself, but the politicians get all of the protection that the tax-paying citizens can afford? Got it. Before Biden was elected, I used to have Democrats argue with me online that Biden wasn't trying to take anybody's guns and that Republicans were just overreacting. But I don't hear anyone arguing with me anymore because they realize now that I was right. And it's obvious. It's obvious when this guy,
hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
Works together with this guy.
You're going to take care of the gun problem with me. You're going to be the one that leads this effort. I'm counting on you.
And that guy appointed this woman to the Supreme Court who can be seen here applauding the confiscation of your firearms.
In the past 10 years, we have passed laws that include everything from the introduction of gay marriage and the banning of conversion therapy, right through to embedding a 1.5-degree climate change target into law, banning military-style semi-automatics and assault rifles.
Come on, guys.
Please, wake up.
Dangerous times. We already know these are unpredictable times financially. But let me tell you why these are dangerous times morally. I want to call your attention to something Biden said recently.
Second Amendment, like all other rights, is not absolute.
Did you hear that? Your God-given rights aren't absolute. Isn't it interesting how the Constitution protects our God-given rights, and yet almost every time you see someone trying to undo these God-given rights, they happen to be a Democrat? Every time you turn around, there's some Democrat arguing that the Constitution is outdated or that something needs to be abolished because it's not working out for Democrats. Well, of course it's not working out for you because the Constitution wasn't designed to work out for big government. Case in point, the Electoral College.
But first off, how do we solve this problem of we win the election, but we don't get to be president?
Yeah.
Because this has happened twice now.
Yeah.
Since 2000. Al Gore and now Hillary. And it seems to be happening to one party.
Only us. Only Democrats.
Right. Which is, of course, the way they would want it.
Yeah.
You kind of can't blame them for that. But how do we fix that?
Well, I'm in the process now writing an article that says there's a simple solution to it. We have to just abolish the Electoral College. It's not...
But they're not going to go along with that. And isn't that a constitutional amendment?
Requires a constitutional amendment.
That is some heavy lifting.
But all right, so it involves heavy lifting.
Right.
Let's lift heavy.
Just abolish the Electoral College, Democrats say. We're losing elections, so change the Constitution. What about that time Joe Biden launched a disinformation board as part of his Homeland Security? He appointed Nina Jankowicz to be the person who determines what information is true and what isn't. The Biden administration put the action on pause just 3 weeks after they launched the stupid idea because conservatives saw right through it. The Biden administration wanted to effectively kill your First Amendment right to free speech. Because if he could get Homeland Security to classify your speech as misinformation, then he could lock you up under the guise of it being a threat to national security. When Trump was president, I used to constantly hear people talking about the fact that Trump was somehow a dictator. Excuse me? I don't ever recall Trump setting up a ministry of truth under Homeland Security. I'll tell you who else did that, though.
They suppressed all dissent within Germany, making it a crime to criticize the regime. The newly established Ministry of Propaganda and Enlightenment set up various chambers to control specific aspects of German culture, such as art, literature, theater, film, music, virtually all forms of entertainment and all forms of dissemination of news. In 1933, in April, Nazi German students decided to organize a nationwide book burning program to eliminate foreign influence, to purify German culture as they saw it.
And finally, the Democrats' current attempt to rob you of your right to defend yourself. Biden lied in that speech, by the way. What he keeps referring to in that clip is a lie that Biden's been telling for years, is that the Second Amendment wasn't designed to be absolute because you couldn't buy a cannon back then. That's a lie. You could own a cannon. Heck, you could buy one now if you wanted to. This is why these are such dangerous times we're living in. Because those of you who fully understand what the Constitution is, you know that Democrats aren't trying to take the rights that the Constitution gave us. They're trying to take our natural God-given rights from us. I was listening to the radio the other day and they played this clip of Joe Biden saying that our rights aren't absolute. And somewhere in the middle of the radio show, a caller called in and he said, I wonder what Joe Biden thinks about the 14th Amendment. Will Democrats attempt to argue in the future that blacks aren't absolutely free? I know. Someone's always going to say, boy, that's a stretch, until it's not a stretch anymore. Did you honestly think you'd ever see the day when a U.S. president would appoint someone to determine what truth is? Nope. You never imagined it, but we just witnessed it. As I said, we didn't really have a lot to unpack here today. I just wanted to get your input on all of this take your guns talk. In this episode, we uncovered the road to hell. We discussed how Democrats have a practice of saying things that sound pleasant. I mean, who doesn't want to remove children from harm's way? We all do. Democrats just have this diabolical scheme that involves 330 million Americans disarming themselves. No thank you. We've read the book. We know how this ends. Our past gun culture. I took you for a trip down memory lane so that you could see for yourself this fallacy of the Democrats that somehow more guns, more gun culture equals mass shootings. It's a lie. I think I laid out the argument pretty well that guns were definitely part of our lives, and even with guns being a part of our cartoons, during all of that time, we did not have the mass shootings that we have today. I'm not making this stuff up. Ask your grandparents how many mass shootings they experienced as a kid.
Don't worry, I'll wait.
Why we have a Second Amendment in the first place. We broke down the Second Amendment to discuss why we have a Second Amendment in the first place. Plain and simple, to protect our country from tyranny, both foreign and domestic. A lot of Americans, quite frankly, are spoiled. So we have a hard time processing the fact that we could ever have domestic tyranny. You'd better speak to some of these immigrants who fled their country to come here. You'll realize really quickly they weren't running from their neighbors. They were running from their government. But the really scary part is when you realize some of these people these immigrants were running from are the same people that Democrats look up to. The response from the left. We discussed the response from the left in the wake of these mass shootings. They're predictable. They abandoned the root causes approach that they used for the border crisis in favor of the socialist playbook to disarm every American. Democrats use every mass shooting as an opportunity to steal your God-given right to defend yourself. But it's getting worse now. They're turning up the heat. They're wanting you to know that Canada banned all of their firearms in an attempt to make it appear as the United States being the country that doesn't get it. Oh, we get it all right, because we know history. That's the reason why the last thing on today's agenda is to address the fact that we're living in dangerous times. Finally, we discussed what makes these times so dangerous now. What makes the United States unique is that we're the only country on the planet to say we don't have these rights because America gives them to us. We have these rights because they were given to us by God. We just secure them. The Constitution is just the document that spells out what these rights are to ensure that no one, including government, takes them from us. And what makes these times so dangerous is we not only have the Democrat Party, but a U.S. president telling us we don't absolutely have these rights. And they're systematically trying to undo everything that set our country apart in the first place. And that's where I'll leave it for now. If you're new around here, our channel is both a combination of podcasts, long-form understanding of conservative principles, and soapbox news, videos where you get to get on your soapbox about the latest news of the day. Be sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who should have been here with us today. We'll see you next time.